The president heads to France, but not before getting a lot off his chest. And deadly fires in California continue to grow, threatening communities and forcing thousands to escape. Plus, we will show you a rare look inside Gaza and how people there really feel about Hamas.
From the I24NEWS studio in Times Square in New York, this is Take 30 with Shayna Estulin.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Take 30. I'm Tal Henrik in for Shayna Estulin. The president traveled to France today to take part in a ceremony marking 100 years since the end of World War I. But before leaving, the president spoke to reporters on the tarmac, and he had a lot to vent about including the Obamas.
Oh, Michelle Obama said that. I haven't seen it. I guess she wrote a book. She got paid a lot of money to write a book. And they always insist that you come up with controversial. Well, I'll give you a little controversy back. I'll never forgive him for what he did to our United States military by not funding it properly.
A lot to cover there. Good thing we have our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv, to break it all down for us. Dan, what do you make of that dig at Michelle Obama? Do you really think she wrote her book for the money?
Well, first, his choice of words, right? I'll never forgive President Obama for, in effect, ruining the U.S. military. That's because he heard the big quote that comes from Michelle Obama's memoir that says she will never forgive Donald Trump for questioning whether her husband, Barack Obama, really was born in the U.S., because then some nut with a gun might come and threaten the Obama family. She said she would never forgive him. Did she do it for the money? Well, you know, it's expected of former presidents that they will write a memoir. Former first ladies, they often do. And these days, of course, the publishers do offer multi-million-dollar advances. But then the author, in this case Mrs. Obama, decides to do either a lazy job or go deep. She went deep. She revealed, as you may know, in her new book about her marital difficulties with Barack Obama, why they had marital counseling. For the first time, she revealed that she had a miscarriage, how that made her feel. So apparently, it's an interesting book of revelations. Now, when Donald Trump writes his post-presidential memoir, we'll see if he goes deep. Tal?
What if Melania will write one, right? Well, Dan, the president also spoke today about his controversial choice of Matt Whitaker to replace the Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Did he say anything about his expectations from Whitaker in regards to the Russia probe?
Good for you. A lot of people didn't notice whether that came up in that kibitzing between the president and the press on the South Lawn of the White House, but it did. And he simply said, no, I did not talk about the Mueller investigation with him. Just a little bit later, the president said that the entire Russia investigation is a hoax. There was no collusion. All it was that Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate and I beat her. That's how he answers questions about the Mueller investigation, Tal.
We're 3 days now after the midterms, and in Florida and Georgia, they're still counting the votes. Dan, what does President Trump think about that?
He says that votes are coming out of nowhere. He says, what? It's after the election, and they're still finding votes? His critics, Democrats mostly, of course, say, how ridiculous. We're talking in some cases about votes that were mailed in quite legally. In some places, if you just postmark it by election day, then that's valid. And then, of course, it'll be opened a couple of days later. But the president says that his favorite candidates in Florida, they won fair and square by a pretty good margin. And now their victories are in question. He says there's a problem. There's a scandal. He points to Broward County, Florida, around Fort Lauderdale, where there were problems even in the year 2000. You remember George W. Bush versus Al Gore and recounts that took 5 weeks in a Supreme Court decision. This is a mess. And Donald Trump doesn't like it, Tal.
And the president left to Paris today to participate in a ceremony commemorating 100 years to World War I, along with many other world leaders. What's on his agenda?
I looked that up because I knew you would ask, and a lot of people know that there's this big parade on Sunday. You remember when President Trump said we ought to have a big military parade here in Washington, D.C., and then found out it would be very expensive, the roads would have to be repaired and all that. So he's going to a parade in Paris instead. That's Sunday, 11/11, November 11th, the end of World War I 100 years ago. Well, it turns out on Saturday he has lunch hosted by the French President Macron, a fancy dinner in the Musée d'Orsay. In between, he and Mrs. Trump are visiting an American military cemetery about 100 kilometers or 60 miles northeast of Paris. But there are also talks with French President Macron, the only talks scheduled.
All right, a very ceremonial weekend for the president. Let's see if he acts ceremonial. Dan Raviver, senior Washington correspondent, thank you for that. One other issue the president brought up with reporters there on the tarmac is his latest move to crack down on immigration. The president on Friday signed an order denying asylum to those who cross the border illegally. It changes the current U.S. law, which states anyone is eligible for asylum no matter how they get into the country.
We need people in our country, but they have to come in legally and they have to have merit.
Joining us now is Jorge Heredia, former anchor and national correspondent for Mundo Fox. Jorge, great to have you on the show. What do you think about the proclamation that the president has signed today? How much more difficult is it going to be now, starting Saturday, actually, to get asylum in the United States?
Well, we don't know exactly what the threshold changes are going to be, which is, kind of part of the problem, because they're basically asking these people that instead of coming over illegally, that can you please form a single file line at a border crossing? Of course, even if they were to all suddenly go and stand in a single file line and wait for their turn to ask for asylum, we don't have enough judges and we don't have enough personnel to actually file any of the paperwork that's needed in order for people to actually ask for asylum. And that's part of the issue. It doesn't actually stop immigration, illegal immigration. Okay, if I'm someone that has to go and stand in line, even if I'm willing to do so to get asylum, I don't know what the thresholds are. I don't have a place to live. How long those people are going to just sit at the border and wait is anybody's guess. My personal one is that it's not going to be very long, and they're going to come in illegally regardless.
So it's definitely not something that thousands of migrants in the caravan can do to seek the legal path, right?
Correct. And those thousands of migrants that are coming to the United States, they're hundreds and hundreds of miles away still. They might be here in a month. They might be here in 4 months. Nobody really knows. A lot of them have actually seeking asylum in Mexico already. A lot of them have gone home. And this does not affect people that are currently right now in the United States illegally. It'll only affect those that are coming in. And the likelihood that it actually helps put a stop to illegal immigration is pretty much nil. The laws already exist. You can already go to the border. You can already stand in line. You can already ask for asylum. This is just going to add another threshold. And even if people are caught, we have no place to hold them, to send them back. The laws currently between the United States and Mexico allow for Mexican citizens that are caught in the United States illegally to basically be rapidly deported back to Mexico. But that does not work with Honduras, Guatemala, or any place in Central or South America.
Jorge, I want to ask you this. Even if the caravan migrants were not asylum seekers, let's say, as the president often suggests, and they are simply people who want to work here in the United States, even if all of them had a degree and some money and they were blonde with blue eyes, it's not as if it's very easy to come here as a foreigner and be able to work legally, right?
Not at all. It's actually extraordinarily difficult. It's very expensive, which is part of the problem. That's why instead of having stopgap measures, the U.S. government really has to look and give a hard look to immigration reform, to realize that a lot of these people don't necessarily even want to live here. If we had worker visas, per se, into the millions, and I'm not saying that this would solve the problem, but a lot of the people just want the work. They want to leave home so that they can make a living for their families. And even with some money, even with legal advice, sometimes it takes months or years. The backlogs in the courts are astronomical, whether you're seeking asylum or not. And I know this from personal experience when I became a U.S. citizen. It's not an easy thing to do, and the system really needs a total overhaul in order, along with security. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to ever say that illegal immigration is correct, because it's not.
Jorge Heredia, I think you touched this point where Democrats and Republicans do think alike. The system needs to be fixed. And speaking of immigration, the United States dramatically changed its immigration policy in the years after World War I. This Sunday marks 100 years since the armistice, and we will take a look back at a war that changed the world. That's coming up here on Take 30. Welcome back. 3 fast-moving wildfires are burning through California right now when they're sending residents racing to escape. In Northern California, the so-called Camp Fire destroyed homes, hospitals, and businesses, leaving the town of Paradise in ruins. State authorities say that at least 5 have been killed. More than 20 million people are under red flag warnings across the state. Joining us now is correspondent Natalie Burnell. She is in Oak Park, California. Natalie, what are the conditions like over there?
Well, Tal, that's right. There's another inferno burning here in Southern California. It is called the Woolsey Fire, and we just got the latest numbers. It is at 35,000 acres and 0% contained. It is reducing homes just like the one behind me to rubble, and fortunately this couple was able to get out safely. But you know, the home next door looks almost untouched, which goes to show you the erratic nature of these fires. At sunrise, firefighters received some much-needed relief from air support.
Everyone is responding with every tool in the toolbox.
The wind-driven Woolsey and Hill fires devouring the brush near Thousand Oaks, California.
It happened so fast.
Dozens of homes here already destroyed.
It's just devastating. What you take for granted every day, being able to come home and rest your head on a bed, it's gone.
The flames jumping the busy 101 freeway, halting commute. More than 100,000 people under evacuation orders, including all of Malibu. You can see the bumper-to-bumper traffic on the famous Pacific Coast Highway. Residents scrambling to leave.
I knocked on my roommate's door and he said, let's get the hell out of here. And so grabbed whatever I thought I could grab and luckily made it down the street in time.
To the north, heartbreaking destruction as the Camp Fire about 90 miles outside Sacramento turns deadly. Strong winds sparking terrifying fire whirls. Some residents narrowly escaping the danger, their cars surrounded by golden flames.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
We've got 4 people trapped in the basement.
4 stuck in a hospital basement, saved moments before the building went up in smoke. In the city of Paradise, apocalyptic images as at least 2,000 homes and businesses are destroyed. Acting Governor Gavin Newsom has declared a state of emergency up north as well as here. And as this fire continues to grow, officials say they don't know exactly how many homes like this one have burned, but they believe that number will be, quote, significant. Live in Oak Park, California, Natalie Burnell, Tal, back to you.
Natalie, we're hearing stories of people literally running for their lives. How many people have evacuated, if you know, and why is the fire spreading so quickly over there?
Sure, Tal. Well, the fire is spreading so quickly just because of these erratic winds. Here they're called the Santa Ana winds, and they whip up and they sort of leapfrog, sending embers, leapfrogging through neighborhoods. And yes, it sent people running from their homes here in this neighborhood. The residents here described it as a war zone, thick black smoke as they were trying to get out. Fortunately, everyone in this neighborhood was able to get out safely.
Natalie Burnell, thank you. The 2 fires raging in Southern California have started to engulf the city of Thousand Oaks, the same community still reeling from a mass shooting just over 24 hours ago. And we're learning more about the 12 victims of that senseless tragedy. One man who was killed had survived the mass shooting in Las Vegas only a year before. Telemachus Orphanus was a military veteran, and he was just 27 years old. His mother is pleading for action.
And I don't want prayers. I don't want thoughts. I want gun control, and I hope to God nobody else sends me any more prayers. I want gun control. No more guns.
So sad. The FBI is now working to piece together a profile of the shooter in order to figure out a motive. Sunday will be the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. World leaders, including President Trump, will be in France in a ceremony to mark that anniversary. The 4-year war pitted allies, Great Britain, France, Russia, and the United States against Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Around 40 million people were killed, making it one of the deadliest wars in history.
Gathering international leaders for this armistice, which is falsely understood as the end of the war. Gathering the heads of state is a very strong symbol to ask the question how to deal with tensions. We can have differences, but how do we manage them to avoid war?
To discuss, let's bring in Tyler Stovall, a history professor and dean of humanities at the University of California, Santa Cruz. French President Emmanuel Macron, he said this week that he is struck by the parallels between Europe's current crisis and those that tore Europe apart 100 years ago. What does he mean by that, Professor?
I think he sees a Europe that is divided between different nationalist parties, a Europe that feels that it needs to carve out a greater place in the sun. But I must say that I hope that his parallel is mistaken, and I hope that there will be no return to anything like what Europe and the world saw 100 years ago.
Can we say that some of the conflicts that we see around the Middle East these days are living reminders to the consequences of World War I?
Absolutely. They are demonstrations of what happens when nations are unable to sort of solve their differences, and what happens when sort of nationalist fervor gets enlisted for military causes. So I think, for example, the tensions that are going on in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, the tensions that are going on in Syria, in some ways have a direct link to the attempts to divide up the Middle East that came out of World War I. So there's a sense in which the legacy of the war is still very much with us.
And if we're drawing certain parallels between back then and today, I guess we can also say that both the First and the Second World War, which some would say are Part 1 and Part 2, was somewhat reflect Germany's aspiration to be a dominant leading power in Europe in one way or another. And some people would say that today Germany still has this aspiration and that it's fulfilling its predominance through the European Union. Can we really draw such a line, do you think, from 100 years ago to the European Union of today?
Well, it's interesting to make the point that what Germany sought in both World Wars, to a certain extent it has achieved by peaceful means, by the expansion of German commerce, for example, by the expansion of bilateral and multilateral relations between the unified German state and the rest of Europe and the world. So Germany is today, again, very much a dominant power in the world, and in Europe in particular. But I think it's important to really emphasize that this has been done by peaceful means. And this also happened in the aftermath of a 40-year division of the German nation, division and occupation of the German nation by foreign powers. So, you know, it'd be very hard to say that the wars were worth it in terms of creating German dominance, because Germany and the world lost so much as a result of these wars. But it is nonetheless true that Germany does occupy a very important position in the world today that it was trying to achieve as a result of the world wars.
And on Sunday, Professor, world leaders, including President Trump, will be in Paris to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the armistice. What do you think should be their message or a conclusion that we have to take from this war, remembering it 100 years after?
I would sum up the conclusion in two words. The conclusion should be never again. Never again should the world go to a war like this. And it's important to remember that when the war started in 1914, it was seen as something that would be short and glorious. Nobody expected the war to last 4.5 years. Nobody expected tens of millions of dead to result. So I think in commemorating the end of the war, what I hope leaders will do is reflect upon how ghastly it turned out, that for all that you can talk about victory and defeat, nonetheless, the basic reality was the death of tens of millions of people. And I hope that they will conclude that nothing in foreign policy justifies an event like that again.
You know, every year on November 11th in the UK, many people wear red poppies in tribute to fallen soldiers of World War I. And I was wondering, how do you explain that the memory of World War I is so strong in one country, in the UK, whereas in other countries who fought the war, you don't really see that?
No, it's a very interesting phenomenon, and it is true of the UK. I mean, for both France and Germany, for example, World War II was more important for Germany because of Nazism, for France because of the Nazi occupation. But for the British, the First World War was a time in which, after trying to stay out of European conflicts for centuries, the British were drawn in. It was the first time that the British developed a major land army, for example. The first time that the British engaged in warfare outside of colonial and imperial spaces. And so even though Britain certainly was active in the Second World War, and many areas of Britain were bombed during the war, there was nothing like the kind of mobilization of the British people that you had during the First World War. And you have, as a result, throughout the country memorials to the World War I dead.
Tyler Stovall, a history professor and Dean of Humanities at the University of California, Santa Cruz, thank you. We want to end the show tonight with a rare look into what's actually happening inside Gaza. The area is under tight control by Hamas, so ordinary Palestinians there, they don't often share how they really feel living under the Palestinian militant group's control. Alec Pollard has this story.
Nearly 8 months of protests along the Israel-Gaza border, dubbed the Great March of Return. Thousands of Palestinians encouraged into action by the ruling government of Hamas have taken part in the weekly rallies along the fence separating Israel from Gaza, some peacefully and some armed, trying to breach the border. The casualties of these marches steadily mounting. Now, more and more Gazan residents are saying enough is enough.
Those who called on us to protest at the border need to protect us, stand by us. Anyone who needs treatment, at home or abroad, should get help. But nobody takes care of us. Only the people with connections get treatment. We treat them like cows or cattle. They stay away from us.
An estimated 224 people have died in the border marches. Some 20,000 were injured. Around 6,000 of those have sustained limb injuries from IDF fire. They wind up here at a Doctors Without Borders clinic to get treatment, the only place they can get help. Hamas offers $100 a month to come to the border, $200 to $500 for the injured, and $3,000 to the families of those killed. But it's these injured young men who feel their government has abandoned them the most.
At the beginning of the protest, the treatment was good, when there were few people. After the casualties mounted and the treatment dragged on, they started treating us in a barbaric way.
Yet it seems there is no way out for the youth of Gaza. Unemployment is rampant at a staggering 53%, and leaving the Strip is not an option. A sense of complete hopelessness has taken hold, leading these men to continue making their way to the border, day and night, trying to target Israeli soldiers while risking their lives, indifferent to their own fate, using fireworks, burning tires, loudspeakers, lasers.
We arrived here not afraid to die, become a martyr, or be injured. As long as there is a solution to this place, we will give the Jews the chaos until they find us a solution, bring us closer to a solution, open the border, give us jobs.
God willing, we shall return. We are not afraid. We will enter the land of Palestine.
But despite the fiery rhetoric at the fence, some brave voices point the finger of blame at Hamas.
For us, the responsibility is on the government, on Hamas. They gave each injured $200. Since the day I was injured, no one took responsibility over me. We've gained nothing. We've not seen them improve a thing. If the marches continue, we won't find one person who can stand on 2 legs. These were exemplary people for our nation. Now everyone in the street is on crutches and with metal implants.
Despite the talks of a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, Gaza's future still seems bleak. An entire generation of youth in danger of wasting away. Alec Pollard, I24 News.
And today was another very tense day on the Israel-Gaza border. That does it for Take 30, but don't go anywhere because Stateside is next. Derek Dennis will bring you the latest updates from California, both about the raging wildfires and the latest on the investigation of the shooting in Thousand Oaks. And we also take a look at the midterms result from the eyes of a group of President Trump's supporters who happen to be women. So much more news ahead. Thank you for watching. I'm Tal Henrik.